Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Makaya Otini, and today we're speaking with Jeremy Podgursky, a composer who synthesizes a deep awareness of the classical canon with sensibilities shaped while playing in indie rock bands. Jeremy is as likely to find musical inspiration in literature, film, and dance as he is in the sound of the subway or a broken HVAC unit. He's received support from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Fromm Music Foundation Commission, the Copeland House Residency, the Mizzou New Music Festival, and elsewhere. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities at thedatekeepers.com.
Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you. Can you please tell us about yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. My musical journey started as a little classical piano monkey prodigy, supposedly. And by 8 years old, I was playing Beethoven sonatas and not much exposure to pop music until then. And then by middle school, I got a pawn shop guitar and started learning Beatles songs. And next thing you know, I'm in bands. And throughout high school, I was playing in the punk and indie rock scene in Louisville, Kentucky, and still on the piano and taking lessons and a choir boy. And that led to college not knowing what to do besides music. So I went in as a piano major and then realized I didn't want to play other people's stuff. So I wrote my own stuff and switched to composition and started a new band and was living that dual life of rock and roll spontaneity and vernacular, or whatever you want to call it, while studying modernist composition. So after finishing my bachelor's degree, I went on with my band. We were called the Pennies, and we were touring all over and recording albums and doing the DIY thing, and also starting to work with bigger labels. And we spent 2 years recording an album that we funded ourselves. And then we were in talks with some big labels to put it out. And we broke up after 2 years of working on the record, So I fled to Chicago and I worked for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and started teaching piano and guitar to beginners because I just needed to make a living. And while there, I saw so many amazing concerts that I decided I needed to go back and finish what I started. And I did my master's degree in composition and then taught at University of Louisville for a couple of years and then moved to Bloomington, Indiana to do my doctoral degree. So the funny thing is I'm back doing rock and roll now.
That's cool. And can you talk about the difference between them and the similarities?
Well, the difference for me is that in rock and roll, I get my hands dirty by actually playing the music and singing it. And I'm able to express myself emotionally without holding back if I want to, So it's hard to really, really put yourself out there as vulnerable as possible. But I've had trouble with that in the realm of composed music because you have to, notate your ideas, and those ideas have to be interpreted by performers through notation. And the better you get at it, maybe you're at 75% of what you thought the piece should be through your notation. And you get better and better at it as you do it. But it still relies on other people so much to bring to life. And in rock and roll, I can just, if I want to work with someone, I can just start playing the song for them on a guitar or piano or whatever. And we can discuss options of what to do and do it on the spot just by playing.
You said you were deemed a child prodigy. That must have been a lot of pressure. What was that like?
I should downplay it a little bit. There's a lot of child prodigies who just end up burning out or quitting their instruments because they just can't take it, or they don't even love doing it. Just because you're really good at something doesn't mean you love doing it. But I'm no longer impressed by incredible technical prowess after going to an incredibly prestigious music school for quite a while. I mean, there are enough incredible pianists that, you can spit in any direction and hit one of them, and they're just everywhere. So I think that the standards for what a prodigy is today are very different from when I was a little kid, but still, it was a lot of pressure. Probably I put on myself, which has always been the case. I'm a little bit of a ham. I get up on stage and I really kind of turn into something else, but um, but my father used to take me to certain restaurants in town that had pianos, and I'd earn some free dinners for the family. That was pressure.
So, if technical skill is not what impresses you, what does it for you? What does impress you?
It's the intangibles. You can't teach them. You can't. Some people say you can't teach them. I got kind of an argument with someone about this recently about teaching composition. I don't believe you can teach people how to be soulful. They're either aware of it or they aren't. There's just no methodology for it. But, someone could easily turn around and say to me, Jeremy, who are you to determine whether something has soul or not? That's subjective, right? Maybe there's just some sort of personal connection to either the tone of the performer or the temperament of how they play something. Just, it's an energetic thing. I've just heard so many performances on a really high technical level that were robotic and not quite so sincere. No, I don't want to call them insincere, but I just didn't connect to them on a level of humanity. Actually, I have something to relate to you as a writer. There's a book that's routinely scrutinized and made fun of, Infinite Jest. It's a summer project. It takes a few months to read it. You have to read the endnotes, and there are 100 pages of those, but they really do contribute. But, he got criticized a lot for his writing technique being more important than the substance. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing. That book, it destroyed me. Emotionally, it destroyed me. And yet, here was this person with unbelievable chops finding all new ways to write a narrative. Very, very, very creative. There are people who have figured out how to have absolutely human, full spectrum of emotions while having unbelievable technical facility. You probably experience this in the writing world where there's someone who's got chops, but they can't tell a story.
Oh, yeah.
That's all over the place. That was the big problem until AI came along, and now it's easier for people to talk about AI and complain about AI. But I think that the lack of good storytellers is actually a deeper and more profound problem that has not gone away now that AI is on the scene. But the advent of AI into the writing scene is just compounding a deeper problem, but it's also an easy scapegoat.
Sure. Yeah. So can you teach that? Can you teach how to write a soulful, heartfelt, substantial story?
Yes. Yes.
But the universities are not trying. I say this having been through an MFA program. The universities are not trying to teach that. They're teaching only technical skills. They're not teaching storytelling.
And as someone who I grew up in an oral storytelling culture, and I love stories. And even at school, I have my BAs in linguistics and my MAs in journalism. And linguistics was all technical. And I drove my professors crazy by turning every lesson into a story. And I met hundreds of writers from all over the world and mainly the US. And whenever I would ask them what's the difference between good writing and good storytelling, a lot of people think those two things are one. And I'm like, no, they're not. You can be the best writer out there. And if you don't know how to tell a story, you're screwed. And I think a lot of people, whether by default or because everyone is stressed or focused on like short forms like TikTok, people can't tell a simple story, even about their lives.
Growing up, did you ever get to see the master musicians of Jijuka?
No.
You should check them out. They kind of got world famous because they were doing stuff with the Rolling Stones in the late 60s, but it's a group of musicians in Morocco. The most important part is that the way they learn their music working together is the equivalent of the storytelling tradition. It's a form of folk music. It has degrees of improvisation. And there's something about that with older cultures in particular where I feel like there's a stress placed upon transmitting essence, transmitting substance when you grow up in that kind of folkloric culture. And I think that I had some of that from my father's side in particular. He was a refugee, made it to America when he was 12 and had been all over the world at that point. But there was an oral tradition of learning songs and learning fables and things that just kind of stuck in my imagination and kind of maybe they were a template for everything from here on out has to have some bit of that humanity to them.
Since you work in so many different genres, do you find that you are drawing on techniques that are indigenous to one genre and applying them in another? And if so, how does that work? Or do you compartmentalize when you're composing or when you're writing songs? Like, how much do you let those genres bleed together in your work?
It's funny you ask that because I used to be so dead set on having an impenetrable boundary between the two. I actually had a private lesson with a pretty big composer when I was doing my master's degree, and I was all ready for him to just, you know, bestow his technical wisdom upon me after playing a piece for him and telling him my background. And he just looked at me, he's like, I think you need more of your rock and roll in your music. And at the time, I thought that's the most asinine, ridiculous thing. And I, because it's not what I was hoping to hear, nor did I expect to hear it. I mean, he was really, really an eloquent, deeply spiritual man. And it was just kind of a letdown at the time. And then I realized a few years later, when I had a chance to write for Alarm Will Sound, they're one of the premier new music ensembles in the world, and they amplify everything, and they've done some crossover stuff with more pop and rock, and I think they've even supported Björk on one of her tours. They did some Aphex Twin arrangements for chamber orchestra, and so I had a chance to write for them, and it was the first time I wrote for a drum kit. I've tried to instill my chamber music, orchestral music with some of the energy of rock and roll to varying results. That's always dependent upon how far out there the performer is willing to go with their energy. Some of them are, some of them aren't. So you're dependent upon their collaboration.
Why did you initially feel so strongly that the genres should be compartmentalized?
I think that was my imposter syndrome for the most part, feeling like I didn't truly belong in either world. In the indie rock world, I got a lot of crap for being a trained musician. You're not supposed to know what you're doing. You're not supposed to care. There's supposed to be some kind of reckless abandon and spontaneity to it. It's rock and roll, right? And then in the classical music world, because, I didn't grow up going to Interlochen and Aspen and all those. I wasn't one of those classical music kids. And so when I got to music school and was surrounded by them, I felt like I had so many years of catching up to do that I didn't truly belong there. So it was a kind of weird sort of double imposter syndrome, I guess. But there was a point in time when the rock and roll kids found their way into the academy and started to disrupt things. And that was before I did it. So, when you grow up with it's all about your access to media, isn't it? Like,
Oh, yeah.
if you grow up with the internet or radio or MTV or whatever, you're not going to be this, little house on the prairie classical music kid who's never heard Nirvana. And I met people like that, but as time has progressed, that's harder and harder to find. Most kids going into music schools may love playing classical music on their instruments, but they've been exposed to so many different genres.
Do you feel like you've overcome that imposter syndrome? How do you feel now, like in relation to your career, in relation to the classical music world writ large and the indie music world?
I'm in a really weird place right now with how and where I fit into the contemporary classical music world. You have to be very careful how you talk about it in this day and age. People remember things. It's the smallest niche of the smallest niche of the music industry. And it's almost like museum culture. And if it weren't for institutionalization through universities and conservatories and the in between places in America and concert series in the bigger cities, it would be gone. No one would be supporting it. It's mostly a live thing. It mostly exists in concert halls at university music schools and conservatories. And when you get out into the bigger cities where it exists in concert series, oftentimes the things that are programmed are the most palatable, that have some degree of tonality, some degree of pulse, some connection to American minimalism, or even elements of American film scoring. I have a lot of issues with this realm because I don't know if there's any place to really expand upon it because its resources are so very limited. I think this is one of the reasons why I'm doing rock and roll again, is because I can focus on my own and work at my own pace in my own studio. As I mentioned before, get my hands dirty. But I also know that when it's finally finished, it's going to be available anywhere on the planet with the internet. Is that the very best way to experience it? No, the best way to experience it would be live, of course. But if I could spend the rest of my life only working in one format, it would be a recording studio. That's my very favorite place to work. It's just a laboratory of never ending delights for me. If I could have my own recording studio in a shed behind my house, I'd disappear there quite often. So I spent a lot of time writing for the classical music world and reached a point where it seemed to me that people were more interested in the message behind what you're doing as opposed to art for art's sake. Like you had to have some sort of explanation along the lines of social justice. And a lot of the grant organizations wanted some spiel about what the piece that you want to write is about. There's just so much that happened. I write music for music's sake. I've never ever had some external message. I mean, I could say this piece relates to this important whatever after the fact, maybe even find some truth in that. But, I have these imaginary worlds in my head that I want to bring out. And I was doing that on paper. I was giving it to performers to perform. And that kind of dried up a bit. So I'll eventually get back to it. I love doing it. It challenges a certain problem solving part of my brain, almost like puzzles, like figuring out how to make puzzles. But the songwriting challenges my heart.
Mhm.
I think in a way that's doubly frustrating because, in one respect, any piece of art should have substance. You can call it a message or you can call it the story behind that piece of art. If it's music or if it's visual art, it may not be readily rendered verbally, but there's something that has the characteristics of narrative in that work. And I think that knowing that and being able to access that layer of it is doubly enriching. But the problem with calling that a message is there's not always necessarily a call to action, and it's not always political in nature. And this insistence on everything being political restricts the range of what meaning in art can be. And necessarily then people disconnect from that art because if they are not personally invested in that specific political agenda or call to action, there's nothing for them to connect to. And that doesn't serve us as artists. It doesn't serve audiences. It doesn't really serve anyone. I think art for art's sake actually is about substance, but you maybe have to draw a meaningful distinction between substance and message because of this weird moment we find ourselves in.
I found myself in a conversation with someone where they're like, no, all art is political. And I'm not so sure I believe that. And they said the days of music for music's sake, art for art's sake are over. Everything is political. And if you don't see yourself as part of this political spectrum with your art, then I just think it's ridiculous. It has to be that way.
Such
And
a
that they're
narrow way of experiencing the world.
Thank you, Jeremy, for saying that because, it's kind of so exhausting. I'm so tired of these political ideologies that are like, no, your work has to be political. Your work has to not make fun of things and people. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to make fun of people starting from myself. And
Well,
art,
yeah, and
yeah.
I come from a tradition like that as well on my father's side of poking fun and being kind of a jester, a gadfly. But you have to be so careful these days not to offend people.
Good luck.
Exactly. It's just this minefield amongst people who are, it seems like they're sharing a brain and who mostly don't have thoughts of their own anyway. They're like they don't I'm sorry, they need to show everyone that they're part of the gang, and it doesn't matter if I agree with them. The behavior, the hive mind, the groupthink, it's repulsive to me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to end on a question that has less to do with the whole political discourse in general. Is there a piece of work that you've written, either a song or an album or a composition, that you feel better than any other conveyed something essential that you wanted to convey? What is that piece and why?
In the notated music world, there's a piece that is going to be coming out soon that I wrote for a double bass player and a cellist, and it's called Eavesdropping on Not So Delicate Beasts. And I basically have been exploring this kind of narrative of multi-movement pieces where it's kind of like a plate spinning routine where whatever movement you hear, when it's over, it's still going on in the background. The plate is still spinning, but you focus your attention on whatever the next movement is. And then you eventually go back to that original plate, but it's evolved into a new state because it's been spinning, you know? So this is a multi-movement piece that has like basically 4 ideas, and I keep going back and forth and investigating them further and further in each movement. And it was just some dream worlds that I feel like I never pushed myself that far with certain extended techniques on the instruments. So there's that. It'll be out sometime this year, and I'll put a video up of it on YouTube and stuff like that. But the other thing would be there's a song that I've demoed for my new album, and it's called All These Bodies. And it's about having a premature Kundalini awakening. It was a really freaky thing that happened. And I think I captured it in a very fun, spirited, really catchy way that's a lot of fun to play. It'll be on my album. That's what I'm working on.
Very cool.
Yeah, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, take care.
Have a great night.
You too. All right. Bye-bye.